Now, 4 truckers who took part in the freedom protest in Canada in February 2022 were arrested then and held in prison for more than 700 days on conspiracy to commit murder, amongst other things. More than 2 years later, 2 of them are still awaiting trial in prison in Alberta. I'm joined now to talk about this by fellow trucker and political commentator nowadays, Gord Magill. Hi, Gord, how are you doing?
I'm well, Mr. Oliver. Thanks for having me. As a fellow Scotsman, it's good to hear your accent again. My mother's from Airdrie.
Oh, really? No, gosh, my goodness. Okay. Well, please call me Neil. Gord, if I can start. Canada and political prisoners. It sounds utterly bizarre that the Canada that I grew up thinking of as the home of freedom would be holding some of its own citizens as political prisoners. Can it be true?
Well, unfortunately, it is true, and there are other actions of the government that prove it. Many people who took part in the Freedom Convoy protests, just regular participants who are expressing their democratic rights to protest in the streets of Ottawa or at Coutts or at any number of other locations, are still fighting what some people call lawfare, where the government is still litigating against them, still throwing charges at them, either delaying disclosure of evidence. And in the cases of some people who were acquitted of charges they received for participating in the protests in the wake of the Emergencies Act invocation, are now having those acquittals appealed by the Crown. So they're being brought back into expensive litigation in the courts just because Trudeau can't be shown to have been wrong.
We're looking at pictures now, who are these men? From what backgrounds do they come? What was their history? That they were accused of plotting to kill.
Right. The Coutts 4 men, as they've become to know, are just 4 regular working class guys. You know, Jerry Morin was a power lineman. Chris Lyzak's an electrician. Tony Oleanick was a trucker and owned a gravel quarry. Chris Carbert had a sort of, a maintenance business. So they're just 4 regular working class guys who had suffered under the COVID regime as so many other millions of Canadians and so many other people throughout the rest of the world. And they came to Coutts, this town on the border between America and Canada, to protest and take part in their democratic rights. And it seems to me, once you investigate the evidence, that they have been used as sacrifices to legitimate Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act, as there was no violence to be found at any of the protest sites. And it looks like the RCMP and the Crown concocted a fantasy that these guys were going to murder police officers, and 2 of them have been in jail ever since. 2 of the gentlemen were let out a few weeks ago with all of the charges against them dropped on plea deals where they signed off on minor gun charges that were not part of the original suite of charges they faced, which brings the entire artifice into question. And if you're paying attention, what does this say about your right to protest, your right to freedom of speech, if the government can pick you up at a totally peaceful protest, concoct a fantasy against you, put you in jail for 2 years, deny you bail, not even get the trial underway, and then at the end of it all just say, oh, sorry about that, we're going to drop the charges now. What right to protest do you actually have?
Now, you mentioned the Emergency Act, which was so controversially brought down by Trudeau's government. I'm right in saying, am I not, that a federal court has since described the invocation of that act in those circumstances as illegal anyway?
Correct. A federal judge ruled that Justin Trudeau had in fact illegally taken away the charter-protected rights of a couple of people who launched challenges against it, and did in fact rule that it was illegal. And what do you know? I think it only took 17 minutes for Trudeau's deputy, Chrystia Freeland, and some of his other underlings to launch an appeal. They didn't even have the time to read the nearly 200 pages of that ruling. They just appealed it immediately without even considering the fact that they may have been wrong.
Andrew Eborn, you're a lawyer. You're listening to that. How does that sequence of events
Well, it's abhorrent that people can have their liberty taken away without any substantial evidence against them. The whole idea of the rule of law is that you should protect everybody, and it's about that sort of side. When you hear about these sort of cases, 700 days taken away from their family, put in solitary confinement, denied all sorts of human rights as a result of it, that's abhorrent, and it must never happen again. We've had very recently a number of examples, like here in the post office, same sort of thing, people taken away, wrongly charged, having to basically plea deal, if you like, in order to get reduced sentences or whatever. Now, that is wrong, and it shouldn't be happening anywhere in the world.
Gord Magill, is there any sign of consequences? You know, there's the government, the Canadian government, found to have acted illegally in bringing down the Emergency Act in the way that it did. People accused of egregious crimes without any evidence brought forward so far, 2 of whom have been released with all charges dropped. There's a mounting list. You know, the bona fide Nazi veteran given a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament. Is any of that rap sheet looking like having any sort of consequences for the people responsible?
No, and they call our Prime Minister Teflon Trudeau for a reason. You know, he's the darling of the Laurentian elite who really run the country. And Trudeau has done an amazing job at insulating himself from any legitimate or substantial critique in the media. We have to remember that the mainstream media in Canada, including the private broadcasters, not just the CBC, were given a $600 million subsidy in 2019 and have received a number of top-ups and extra money through various programs. And Trudeau has bought himself, specifically with this case with the men from Coots, a code of silence. The media will not talk about it. They claim to hide behind a publication ban, which the defense brought, but that publication ban was only on a narrow set of information involving the information to obtain for the warrants. But the government and the media could be asking these questions of the government. How come we have political prisoners in Canada? Why were 2 of these men kept in solitary confinement? Why were they denied bail when none of them had criminal records and they're totally upstanding citizens? Why have they been kept in jail and this trial hasn't got underway for 2 years? All of these questions are legitimate, and there's nothing stopping them from asking them except that they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. Trudeau has bought the media, and we live in, it's just incredible how much they accuse us of peddling in misinformation and disinformation. They are guilty of lying to the Canadian people by failing to report on this case.
Andrew, this failure by mainstream media to hold to the fire the feet of those responsible for what certainly seemed to be egregious acts is awfully familiar.
Yeah, and it is worrying if we're going to be in that sort of say, what's great about this programme is you do call things out. You do say, let's question it. It doesn't mean we've got the answers, but we have to, when you hear about these abhorrent cases and working on that sort of basis, there has to be somebody who's going to fight for the underdog. And the fact that we've had a number of cases similar to this, where basically they don't happen until you make it an ITV drama or something like that, that's nonsense. The mainstream media, we're here to always hold people's feet to the fire.
Gord Magill, trucker, more recently commentator and citizen journalist, thanks for joining me tonight. Keep up the good work and perhaps we'll catch up again in the near future. Thank you very much.